Welcome back to another tactical fly fisher video today. Today I'm bringing you on the water with me after we shot our cider wax and marker video. We also decided that we should shoot an on the water segment. So in this segment I'm taking you to the lower half of kind of a big deep pool. It's typical winter water. One thing I noticed as I was fishing over the last few weeks, as soon as we got a cold snap, a lot of the fish were pulling out of that faster water that they typically inhabit when the water is warmer and when their metabolic rates are higher. But as those metabolic rates drop and the temperature drops, then they tend to drop out of that fast water and seek those deeper, slower winter holding areas. After the last temperature drop and I saw that happening, I figured it was a good time to take you to that type of water, to that winter type holding water that you might find trout in abundance in right now, and show you a little bit how I might go about fishing that type of water. So my mantra typically for any type of water is back to front, near to far, and shallow to deep. I really focused on this one on that back to front, from the tail out of the pool to the middle is about where we shot this. We didn't shoot the upper end. And then I focused from shallow to deep a lot. Started with a shallow dry dropper, went to a longer dry dropper that was heavier, and then to a nymph rig, and then to a heavier nymph rig. So I take you through that progression in this video. It is a long video, so if you can stick with it, you're a good viewer and hopefully a good angler. So let's head straight to the water. I'll take you through this pool. You'll see how I fished it. One thing I did not include, because this video was already really long, I fished the whole tail out of the pool, and that tail out is quite shallow and clear right now with not a lot of current. I've caught fish out of that tail out earlier in the year at higher flows, but in low, late fall base flows, there just didn't seem to be fish in it. So I've cut that portion out so you don't have to watch 10 or 15 minutes of me making casts with no fish. The video starts right at the back end of a little bit of a depression or scouring out from something you'll see that's a little bit interesting in the video. And we're going to jump straight to that point so you can see how I fished the rest of the pool where the fish ended up being. With how clear the water is in this river today, I wasn't really expecting a whole lot in the back half of the pool or the back half of the glide here before it kind of deepens up and becomes that main pool. But I wanted to give, I just missed that fish on the dry. I wanted to give any fish that were in the back half a shot at being caught. That looked like a little brownie that came up and took my dry fly. But there again, you don't want to skip water, right? Water is never good to waste, whether it's in your house or the river in front of you. I always try and, holy cow. That little fish just took a ride. That must have been like a 2-inch long fish. But you never want to waste water. I want to make sure that if there's potential for a fish to be in a spot, I give a chance to catch that fish. There again, not only because I want to catch fish, but also if you spook that fish instead, especially in a spot like this, and you kick it upstream, it's going to alert and or spook some other fish, kind of cause a domino effect. So we don't want that. We want to give ourselves the opportunity to get as many fish as we can out of here. Not only get as many fish, but also really give ourselves to a chance at getting the most fish out of the upper half of the run where I just hooked this little brownie. It looks like, from what I can see, the back end here either didn't have very many or didn't have fish really at all, because it is so shallow and clear and those fish are pretty exposed right now. But I'm expecting, as I get up into here, we've got more fish to contend with. So what was the change? Why did I fish the whole back end, miss one fish? I got a tree in the way there. Why did I miss one fish and catch none in the back end? And then all of a sudden, now in 2 casts, I've caught 2 fish. First, let's get this brownie going. A little bit better fish. Paragon is hidden in his mouth. Let's get it out of there. Thank you, Mr. Fish. But what was the change? Really, it's all about the contour of the bottom for the most part here. The current speed really hasn't changed much from the back of this glide up to where I'm at now or up into there. It's all pretty slow. It's all pretty smooth. The difference is right about where I'm at in the glide is just above that, a little bit of a lip, a little depression, a little depth change as you get further up. What we've got in here, just upstream of me, there's an old car that they threw in the river, who knows way back when, as bank stabilization. And that car kind of has scoured out the river just below. And eventually that scouring effect peters out, and the whole back end of the pool is about the same depth. Really nothing special in the back half here to hold fish other than just the odd scattered fish, which I have caught plenty of fish in the back end here before, which is why I wanted to make sure that I covered it again this time. But today, with how clear the water is, I think they just weren't sitting in it. That back half of the pool is usually best early season when the water's a little higher. But by searching up this glide into the pool, I think I've found basically that zone where we went from flat bottom glide to now the fish are going to probably stack up ahead of us as we get closer to the head and we get a little more depth. All right, I haven't gotten anything in a bit. Oop, there was just a rise. I will, my dry fly rod is behind me here, so I'm going to hurry and cover this guy with the shallow dry dropper rig I have on. If he doesn't take it, I'll go get that dry fly rod. It just rose again. I think my nymph is probably under that fish. And my dry fly, being that it's a size 14 CDC Delta split wing type dry, it's probably a little big to look like a midge. So I'm going to put this rod away for a second, go grab the others that I have, and we'll do a little dry fly fishing. Okay, I have just a few fish rising in front of me here. There's probably a group of somewhere around 3, maybe 4, and they seem to be taking midge pupa right under the film. The only thing that's hatching really is midges right now, and they are just blipping the surface, not even breaking their noses, taking stuff that's not on top. So I've put on a shuttlecock, and I'm like a little midge shuttlecock. I'm hoping they'll be willing to come up and take this. I may have to go smaller. I've started with the size 20, and we'll see how that goes. Oh, well, it goes pretty well. Little fish, little brown trout. Well, that was one of the ones that was rising. I have this dedicated dry fly rod here because I expect some dry fly activity today. And, you know, if you want, you can switch back and forth on one rod. I get asked, you know, a lot of times what my strategy is for that. And for me, it's just more efficient for me to carry multiple rods. As much of a hassle as it might be sometimes if you're not careful about where you leave rods or whatever. For me, I'm just used to that because of having multiple rods most of the time in competition. So it's not really a big deal for me. I'm used to keeping track of rods, and whether I put them down my waders or lay them down, I know where they're at. And having a rod that's dedicated with the specific rig that I like as well is very helpful. So I like to have this dedicated dry fly rod ready to go because inevitably I'm going to hopefully get another fish or two out of this small group of rising fish, but eventually those fish are going to stop rising. And so then if I only had one rod, I'd have to go back, you know, to dry dropper or nymphing in this spot. And what happens if a fish starts rising again? Am I gonna switch back, or am I just gonna try and make it work? By having multiple rods here, I can target them with the rig that I'm really after, instead of basically going halfway and trying to get a dry dropper to work when a dedicated dry fly rod would work better, like that. Or vice versa. You know, if I tried to dry dropper with this rod with the length of leader I have right now, it would be very hard to get that dropper to kick over. I'd have to rebuild the leader every time. Thank you, little brownie. And instead, I can make the swap without the re-rig. Okay. I have a CDC dry, so I'm going to go through the process I took you through in one of the last videos we did. I washed it off a little bit in the river. I've plucked it on the rubber band, and now I'm going to take my top rod and make sure that's powdered up. Okay, couple fish in, and of course I don't really see fish rising anymore. We'll give it a shot where those fish have been. A couple more casts, and then I will go back to the dry dropper rig. Now, as is often the case, at least in this spot, it was mainly just those smaller fish that were rising to the midges, that are willing to expose themselves. That's pretty typical. And as you get down below where the fish feel a little safer, that's often where the larger fish are going to be. There's a head that just came up, just a little further up. Perfect, right in line. Come on. No dice, no taker. Looks like he'd moved a little bit. He just rose again, but about a foot to the right. So there is almost a little bit of a lane or a tongue of current. It's got just a tiny bit of foam going down the center here, and if you get either side of it, the current is essentially stagnant. So that fish is right there in the feeding lane. That zone or that tongue of current that's coming down. Moving back and forth across it. There we go. Okay, so I've got 3 small brownies on the dry fly now. I don't have any more fish that are rising, unfortunately. Those were the 3 that I'd seen rising, and I caught them. So I think I'm gonna put away the dry fly rod here, and we're gonna go back to the dry dropper, but I have a second rod here that, so I have 3 rods. I have the dedicated dry fly rod that I've just been fishing with, a very long dry fly leader that's almost 20 feet long. And then I have 2 nymph rods set up with micro leaders. One is the dry dropper that I fished in the tail out of this pool that also, if I chop that dry fly off the top, then becomes a double nymph rig, because it's spaced about as far apart as I like my nymphs for double nymph rig. So for the head of this pool, that's kind of the nice part about that rod. I can swap back and forth between dry dropper and 2 nymphs. But then I also have this longer dry dropper rod rigged up. Still on a micro leader. Almost everything's the same, except that instead of 20 to 24 inches in between the top dropper and the point fly, I've now got about 3.5 feet, almost 4. And that is specifically to target, this deeper but still slow section of the pool. Up further where it's still deep, but there's ruffled surface currents, there's a little bit faster current, plus that broken surface, then you can go straight to nymphing that. But with how clear this water is, which you can't really see because of the cloudy day, but this water is extremely clear. If I just went and nymphed over all this, those fish would be long gone. So I'm fishing that dry dropper to be able to fish a little further away, but also I just get a better drift in this type of water with a suspended fly below the dry fly than I do just straight Euro nymphing, where my hand probably isn't as steadily in control of the rig as a dry fly on the surface would be. So it's just smoothing out that drift. So I'm gonna just slowly work my way up into the deeper part of the pool here. I still have a 2.5 millimeter inverting bead perdigon on here, a diabetes, right now. We'll see how many fish I can get with that. I just ticked bottom, I think, at the back end of my cast. But it looks like right where my cast ended, there's a little bit of a flat protruding, like a flat surfaced but protruding rock there that is going to probably tick my fly. So I'm going to work over a little bit further to my right. Hopefully it'll be a little deeper there. It's definitely faster. And then I'm going to get up to where I can sit on this bank. I have to be careful. Oh, there's a fish right as I went to cast. Little rainbow. See you later, buddy. Okay. I have to be careful with my back cast here because I'm not very far from, well, I'm right on the edge of the river and there is a tree that's back there. So I'm having to try and cast out over the river as much as possible. If I cast it all in toward the bank, I'm gonna hook that tree. So I'm side arming it out over the middle of the river with the rod tip. And then even though this tippet is really thin and the leader's really thin, it's still gonna drag if I have it sitting there on the surface getting pulled around. So I'm trying to, as the rig comes toward me, I'm trying to strip up some slack so that I only have, 6 inches to a foot of that leader on the water. But then when I have little gusts of wind that come, like right now, I got to drop a little bit more on so that I don't have it get blown away. All right, I am up into water that's, I can still see the bottom pretty clearly because the water is just so clear, but I'm not really getting down in it super well, I don't think. Until the back end of the run, I'm not ever ticking, I'm not hooking fish. So, especially with the little breeze that I have now, I think I probably need to increase my weight a little bit. We're gonna make a little bit of a wholesale switch here, both the dry fly and the dropper, and we'll reconvene in a second. Since I wasn't still catching fish as I came up into the middle of this deeper water here, I could tell that my rig just wasn't getting down the way that I wanted it to early in the drift. So I've taken off, there we go. See, there you go. Proof of concept. Oops, I lost the fish. But I took off my 2.5 mil inverting bead perdigon and the size 16 CDC wing dry fly that I had. I don't want to toss this rock into the river. And I switched to a foam front end loader caddis, which would support a little bit heavier fly. But it's not as aerodynamic, so I couldn't really throw it with the smaller bead very well. Just catches too much wind. So I had that smaller CDC fly on to begin with because it would go through the air easier and I could kick it over with that lighter, smaller bead. But then now that I've got that bigger bead on, that foam front end loader is still fine. and it supports that heavier bead a lot better. And on my first drift I hooked a fish. I'm kind of surprised there wasn't a follow-up fairly quickly after. There's also a fish that just rose up there, so I'm going to try and stay somewhat below that fish with my next few casts here so that I don't spook it, and maybe I can switch back to the dry fly rod and get that fish to eat. Now, as I see the tippet on the water, if I see the tippet is really tight, there's a lot of tension in it. I'm just kind of making those micro mends to break that tension, put a little bit of slack in that tippet above the dry fly. Because if the tippet is tight all the way to the dry fly, I know I'm getting a little bit of drag and it's just not allowing it to sink all the way down. So my secret to, getting it to settle in and sink as far as possible here, first try and give it a little tuck cast. And just make those little waggle mends in the drift to release that tension. Because if I have it tight all the way to the dry fly there, the little bit of sag in my leader there is going to pull on it. Oh, fish just took the caddis dry. It's the first day of November. There hasn't been a caddis around for a while. At least not that I've seen. Considering the water temperature was 39 this morning, and it's not exactly caddis temperatures, but didn't stop this fish from taking it. That's funny. I've dried that dry fly back out, done the old rubber band and top ride and the wing trick. After that fish took that caddis. I'm still not, oh, another little guy on the nymph. This one's a rainbow. Okay. Oof, pretty little guy. Thank you. So now that's a couple fish on the new nymph that's heavier. This one has that 3mm inverting bead on it. And then one on the caddis dry that I switched to. And I'm just watching that tippet. Oop, I just missed one. The dry hadn't moved yet, but I saw the tippet above the dry start to tighten out. And sure enough, when I set the hook, I saw a fish flash. So either it spit it before it showed on the dry, or I was just a little late. There's another little guy. As you can see, there's more than a few little fish in this pool. But hopefully, if we weed through a few of them, we'll get to some of the bigger ones. We'll give that a little bit extra tuck there. And as that tension builds in the leader as it comes towards me, I'm building up slack. I'm just finding which way I need to move. It's just the same idea as a typical mend there. There we go. There's another little guy. So you can see my nymph is now very much more in the zone with where quite a few fish seem to be. That 2.5mm bead probably was just going above them. I think I was talking about the drift, but I lost my train of thought after that fish. But I'm just watching the leader and the tippet like I would if you were indicator fishing, and watching the tension build in it and whether the leader is upstream of it or downstream of it, and if it seems to have enough tension to be slowing the rig down. And then I'm going ahead and making that little mend either to the upstream or the downstream side. Like there, it was piled up downstream, so I mended upstream. Same with that. Boy, if I stand up there, I just feel like I'm looming over this spot, and I don't want to tower over those fish. All right, interestingly, it looks like the current that's down there has got some pretty good speed to it. So I'm gonna fish this dry dropper a little bit further up into this run. And then I think I might switch and go to the double nymph in here. That fish that was upstream rising has stopped. The sun's kind of peaked out now all the way and killed the rising, it seems, because I haven't really gotten up there. I don't think it was me that spooked that fish. I think just as the sun came all the way out, he decided that it wasn't worth rising anymore. We had those clouds before that made it a little friendlier to come to the top. So I'm gonna come forward just that little bit more, and then we're gonna go to that double nymph rig, I think. And I did just kick some waves out, so hopefully it doesn't spook too many fish. There's enough current up here now that I'm a little less worried about it. And that tail out down below where there was not really much in the line of current, it's more of an issue. Yeah, it's kind of speeding through there faster than I want. So I don't think my fly is down in the column as much as I want through the center there. So that's where I think that double nymph rig is going to come in handy. But we'll try a couple on the far side as much as I can get to. There we go. Yeah, so I hadn't made any casts over that far yet. This is a little better fish. Really pretty rainbow. Whoop. Gorgeous red sides on this thing, which in this low angled sun of the fall really lights up. See you later, buddy. Okay, so there was at least one on that far side that I hadn't really shown my flies to yet, so I'll make another couple of casts just a little further across like that before I go to the straight nymph rig. There was another one. So yeah, this dry dropper rig on either side of that fastest tongue of current in the middle seems to be working well. In the dead center current, where it's a little faster, I think it's kind of just bustling through there a little faster than I want, not allowing that nymph to get all the way down. So perfect instance where the dry dropper is great on the near or the far side of that fast current, where it's slower and that suspended drift works better. But maybe through the middle of that faster current in the center, which doesn't really look that fast to begin with until you get flies in there, and then you realize that it's actually moving through there fairly fast compared to the rest of the pool anyway. See if I can go over the top or to the near side where the current's just a little slower. My drifts appear to be better. My flies more appropriately in the zone, and those fish are actually eating it. All right, I'm going to sneak one on the near side over here again. It goes down the inside seam. I haven't really fished up there in a while, or really much at all. Do a couple there, a couple on the far side, and then I'll go grab that other rod and we'll throw a double nymph through the center. Get over that faster current if possible. That one kind of started there but came down the center. And I'm going to try and raise that rod up a little bit more so that my leader stays off the water as much as possible, and my rig can slow down on the far side like that. There we go. Another little brown trout. Okay, oops, thank you. I think what we're seeing so far is the typical dominance hierarchy that often plays out in trout streams. You get these smaller fish that jockey for position behind or around those bigger fish, and we either just haven't gotten deep enough to get down to those fish that are playing the safety game down below, or we haven't gotten up the run far enough to, or the pool far enough to get to those fish at the head that are probably a little bit larger and have the best feeding locations. Down here in this main part of the pool, seems like a lot more of those smaller fish that have the secondary spots that aren't as good, because they get kicked out by those big fish when they go try and take them. All right, let me reach over the top one more time. That's sitting in there a little bit better. I gotta try and make a mend because it's definitely forming a little bit of a drag there. The hardest part about reaching across the currents like that is when you do have wind and you don't have much that's sticking to the surface of the water. It wants to pull that rig across towards me, so kind of have to stick more of the leader on the surface. Oh, there we go. I was going to say that was the tiniest little twitch. Well, just about every time that I decide that I'm ready to go switch to only nymphs, then one more fish comes to play. So I guess we'll try and drain that well until it's all the way dry before I make the full switch. Yeah, down the center there, I really don't seem to be settling in with this rig. This is probably where, on that far side, it would be better just to wade across. So that might be something to do afterward. But I'm having the wind and the faster current kind of pull that rig towards me here, so I don't think my drifts over there are immaculate. I'm getting a little bit of horizontal drag, more or less, I guess, coming across the river. I'm getting pulled into the faster current, out of the slower current. Okay, I'm gonna make that my last drift, and we will go get the other rod and switch to 2 nymphs. So I've grabbed my other rod now that I originally had that shallower dry dropper on for the tail out of this pool. And there's a fish. I've switched it from that, come on tree, whatever, it's a little fish. So I've switched it from that dry dropper to, now I have 2 nymphs. So I just took the dropper off, that was a dry flat, and put another fly on there. I've got a pink light bright perdigon on the point, which is what that fish just ate. And I have a diabetes perdigon on the dropper. And we'll see what happens as I move up just a little bit here. I'm actually letting that rig sit. I'm not getting tight early in the drift because I want those nymphs to have a chance to sink in this really deep water. I mean, it's not like head height deep there, but it's probably pushing 5 feet in the center. It's pretty scoured out. And so I'm allowing those nymphs to get down before I try and get tight to the cider. Oops, I did actually take bottom. So I'm giving them a little tuck at the beginning of the drift. I'm just letting my, got a Sakura cider sitting there in the tippet. I'm letting that rest on the water until I see tension forming where it starts to sink from the flies getting down, and that's when I strip up a little bit of slack to make sure that I'm tight. Oh, there we go. One more little guy. I'm close enough to the center of this pool now. I don't know if really there's very many larger fish that I haven't spooked yet, or if there were really any large fish in there to begin with, but there seems to at least be a few more small guys to get. But with that dry dropper rig, I definitely was not getting anywhere close to near the bottom in this water. I've got, probably 4 feet from my painted on sider to my top dropper, and another 20 inches below that to the point fly. So it's pretty long. There we go. Oops, see ya. And I also have, 2 nymphs now. So my dry dropper was definitely up in the column a little bit in this spot. But you can see it's a pretty slow process. I've been through here now. At least on the far side, I am ticking bottom. But I've been through here with a short dry dropper and a dry fly. And I switched to a longer dry dropper, and I switched to heavier flies on that and a more buoyant dry fly. Now I've switched this rig from a short dry dropper to a double nymph rig to try and fish the rest of it. So that's dry fly, shallow dry dropper, deep dry dropper, 2 nymph rig. That's 4 rigs I've now fished through here. And with each rig change, and often each fly change, or at least weight change, since that's usually the more important factor here, with each of those changes, I'm getting a few more fish. And unfortunately, the bigger ones aren't coming out to play today, but still, you're getting to see the iterative process it is to try and fish a pool like this. If you're up in the head of it, or the riffle coming in, or whatever, there's just not as much column to search, I guess. But in a deep, slow pool like this, with fish that are spread through that column, some that are willing to maybe move, some that aren't, and some that kind of get a little skittish after they've seen you or other fish coming out around them, and they're not all super willing to come up through the column anymore. You've got to work that shallow to deep mantra that I always talk about. You've got to be able to progressively make that transition from shallow to deep, back to front, near to far. It's kind of what I've done in this pool so far. Oh, that wind is killing that drift. And as that's happening, when that wind is really making, having an effect on the drift, I'm letting that Sakura cider portion sink under the water a little bit to try and catch that surface of the water and anchor my leader in place. All right, so the one last thing we're going to do here, we've made those progressive switches I've talked about. We're going to roll a cleanup game through here one last time. I'm going to switch from a Perdigon with a 2.5 mil bead on the point, and we're going to go with a mop with a 2.8 millimeter slotted bead. We'll roll that along down in there. This water's so clear I can see that mop coming through as it gets close to me. You can see that bright cream fly rolling down there near the bottom. And I'm not actually as close to the bottom as I expected through the center there. I could fully see I was about 10 inches to a foot off the bottom. So sometimes you're guessing based on whether your rig is ticking bottom or not. I didn't have to guess with that because it's clear enough I can see it here. It's pretty interesting actually. Through that same area with the last rig, I had 2 Perdigons on. And with those 2 Perdigons, I occasionally tick bottom in there, at least once or twice. switched to a mop that's actually heavier, but I never took bottom because it just sinks so much slower. So I'm gonna make one last change, go to a 3.3 millimeter slotted bead mop, and hopefully get a little closer to the bottom and trigger one last fish or two to eat. All right, I've made that one last change. We're gonna try a slightly heavier mop here again, see what happens, if anybody else comes and has a snack. Down the gut, nobody wanted it, so we'll try the far side. There we go. Little guy to be eating that mop. Well, that was an easy take to spot. That cider, it actually, as sometimes happens in deep water like this, it actually tilted downstream a bit and sped up. And apparently my GoPro battery just died, but yeah, that cider tilted downstream and sped up, and that brownie had taken it. So, well, since the GoPro just died, I don't know how good the GoPro footage is with this tree here anywhere, but since the GoPro footage just died, we'll call that good for the back half of this pool. I wanted to show you the back end here because, especially in the winter, a lot of fish will pile into this slower water like that, in the deeper water. And that head of the pool up there, that's the traditional easy part of the pool where you can go just Euro nymph up some fish. It's not that hard to approach or to figure out how to fish it, but the back end here where the fish are spookier, where you have more depth, more column you got to cover, I figured I'd try and take you through the process of an instance where I show you how I do that, and hopefully that's helpful. All right, thanks for watching this tactical fly fisher video. I hope you enjoyed it. I know it was a long one, so if you made it all the way to here, I'm impressed. You know, I had a hard time watching it myself this far, and I was the one editing it. Thank you though, and if you liked it, give us that thumbs up, and go ahead and subscribe to our channel for any future videos that we get, and hit that bell icon so that you get a notification on your phone. And then come on over to tacticalflyfisher.com. We've got whatever you need for your next fly fishing adventure or your time at the Vice over the winter. Stay safe, everybody, and happy holidays, and stay warm out there this winter as you're fishing or tying in maybe your garage like I am. Thanks for watching.